presidential election. Senator Manchin has not yet announced if he'll run for re-election. Some speculate he might instead announce a presidential bid as a third-party candidate. Polls indicate that a no-labels ticket could become a problem for Biden, but help former President Trump. That's if he wins the GOP nomination. A group of operatives from both parties is seeking to derail a no-labels candidacy. They released a survey of swing states about a potential Biden-Trump no-labels matchup. It found that no labels draws 13 points from Biden and 8 points from Trump. In the 7 swing states, a no labels ticket swings the vote from Biden to Trump.
Jewish and non-Jewish citizens of Israel are treated equally. They have equal access to the courts, equal access to public education, equal access to health care, and anti-Zionism.
Then the Empire State Building that's behind your head.
And looking to the future, Christian Toto, the host of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, thinks the current lack of Hollywood-made content will lead viewers to seek out alternative content from conservative media. Do you think the strikes might have that effect?
Yes, I agree with Christian on that, but here's the caveat. As things spread out and balkanize, which they are doing, they will be less important. The old days when I was very active and when I was actually a negotiator for the Guild and a member of the board of directors, movies like The Godfather and Chinatown that I referenced with Lawrence of Arabia were cultural landmarks. This is gone.
How will it pan out?
Well, that's more of a practical question, and I think that my guess is that September is the point where this will resolve, simply because everybody's on vacation in August, and, things drag on in the heat, which is across America right now. And I think that if you're looking at a target, try September. But I'm not Nostradamus.
All right, Roger Simon, great to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Fun.
Battery plant in Michigan with hundreds of millions of dollars in Michigan state funding. Donna Brennenberg, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on. This is a pleasure.
Sure. So first, in your state of Michigan, there's this massive controversy still playing out about a plan to build a $2.4 billion battery plant that's now moving forward, despite suspicion over its Chinese background. So we know that the governor of your state, Gretchen Whitmer, has been saying that it's going to bring jobs to your state. So what do you know about this whole plan, and what's your take on it?
Well, I've dug into this fairly extensively. Talked to Lori Brock, whom they've been trying to condemn her land up there for fighting the battery plant up there, and looking into the deeper issues that are behind it. I think it's a shame that a foreign company can come in here under the guise of climate change, which is a spectacular way of taking over this state and this nation, to blame it on something that is backed by very, very bad information to lead people astray. It's stated that any business entity that exists within China is property of the Chinese Communist Party. So there's no denying that there's a connection there. And for them to come into this state and take money from our state, we are funding this. Why are we not funding American businesses? Why are we dumping all of this money into foreign entities, our tax dollars, under the guise of private-public partnerships? This is not what we're doing. They are shifting the wealth of the United States of America into the hands of foreign companies in order to subvert the United States of America.
And we know that it's not just a Michigan issue. We know that in the past 5 years, Chinese ownership of American farmland has increased by 55%. So is that something that will be concerning to you? And do you think the federal government is doing enough?
I don't think any of us are doing enough when it comes to this, because it's an invasion by economic means of our nation, and this is a nationwide issue that's going on. There's lots of ways. I think we need to clearly defend war and warfare. We are in a war right now. Most of wars that have been fought are less than 10% actual ballistics and the classical warfare that we think of. Most of it is through intelligence, misinformation, campaigns, and buying up parts of the country through infiltration. And I think that's exactly what we have right here. There should be no ownership of American land by anyone except for Americans.
And finally, before I let you go here, John
Our
Kerry,
American
the U.S.
companies.
Special Envoy on Climate Change, is in China this week to talk about working with Beijing on climate change. So should the U.S. and China keep collaborating on such issues despite apparently concerns about our national security?
Well, I do think we should cut the ties to China for anything climate change, and as well as for furthering the communist agenda here in the United States of America. And politicians and people who are seated in the seats of government need to be answering these questions, because talk about a risk of national security, our elections, any involvement in policy and in funding other governments or entities in other governments which are owned by other governments is an invasion. It is not for economic benefit, nor is it to protect our land. It is for nefarious reasons, and you can't come to any other conclusion than that.
Donna Brandenburg, thanks so much for joining us.
Asian countries are also sending more to the U.S. China became the biggest exporter to America in 2009. It has since remained at the top, though the export volume took a dip after former President Trump slapped tariffs on China. President Biden has kept the tariffs in place. The recent breach of White House emails through Microsoft, spotlighting how China's hacker armies are getting more sophisticated. Instead of the crude smash and grab methods used years ago, they're now focused on stealth. NTD's Faye Quarter has the details.
China's hackers are becoming more and more sophisticated in their attacks on the U.S. Before, hacks from China would immediately raise loud alarms. Everyone could easily see the hack, as well as the fact China did it. And Americans would then know how to guard against future hacks. The methods were quite crude. But now, China's hacks are stealthy. Hackers hide deep inside computer networks for months or even years, quietly monitoring what's going on and gathering data. One method they use is they avoid hacking the main computers. Instead, they hack peripheral devices, such as printers, routers, or the Internet of Things devices. This could include smart TVs.
The malware would be actually loaded into the operating system of a device. And then the device is activated on the network and then can spread to other devices. And this is typically how these hacks are happening today.
Rex Lee is a security advisor at MySmart Privacy. He says that because everything is connected to a network these days, hacking into one item can connect you to every item. The recent attack on Microsoft email accounts, including those of high-profile officials like Gina Raimondo, may have used this method. Experts say it may be the stealthiest attack ever discovered. These attacks worry Americans because they could compromise valuable information.
The biggest thing would be critical infrastructure, going after the power grid. All you have to do is take the power grid out and people are pretty much defenseless.
Lee has little confidence America can protect itself well. He says that the government's cyber infrastructure is extremely outdated, and many organizations don't have the highest encryption standards because those standards may be too expensive. Faye Quarter, NTD News.
Of activity and so forth.
Right, so some experts have linked declining social confidence in China to the declining economic confidence. Would this relate back to what you were just speaking about?
Sure. I mean, in the old days when China was just opening up, they used to say, I'd rather cry in your BMW than laugh on your bicycle. In other words, the young people are looking at material wealth as the priority, as was the state. Now, the young people are the last generation, so to speak. They're not having kids. They have no faith in the CCP. They don't believe the propaganda that comes out. So there's a malaise, a last generation mindset that they're really seeing manifest, and that's a function of the failure of the CCP. It's not the other way around.
Now, China's been gearing up for conflict. Many observers warn that it could try to take over Taiwan in the coming months or years. How do you think a weaker financial footing could impact these ambitions?
I think they call it the Galtieri moment, where Argentina wasn't doing so well, so they invaded the Falklands. I look at more as if it may be that, certainly, because you've got a lot of folks that are unemployed or underemployed. The youth rate, unemployment rate is about 20%. That's probably low. You could probably add another 10% of that. So I would look at China. Xi Jinping, he owns the economy. He's got to have he's got to have a victory, and I think Taiwan will be the next, his next project, his next victory.
All right. Now, the Biden administration has been ramping up talks with the regime after a prolonged hiatus. How do you expect China's economic decline to impact relations with the U.S.?
I think the U.S. is doing something very unwise. We're going to them. We're being treated as a second-class power. We're not. Just the formalities of how the economies and how the arrangements of the meetings are taking place. It's very condescending on the part of China. I think they don't respect the Biden administration. I think that's probably common knowledge by now. So it's more about let's show the rest of the world how weak and irrelevant you are. And that is probably a precursor to action in Taiwan or some other kind of action.
All right, James Gorey, great to hear from you. Thank you so much for your analysis.
Jonathan Williams, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So first, on the U.S. economy, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that last week's report on consumer prices was quite encouraging, adding that even though the U.S. growth has slowed, she does not expect a recession. Is our economy getting better?
Well, let's all hope that Secretary Yellen is correct on that front. I mean, it's been a long time coming. We've been through some painful quarters, obviously, with record high inflation. I mean, is the economy out of the woods yet? I don't think so. There's a few major problems on the horizon. You know, one is the coming massive tax increase that our economy will see if nothing is done in Washington. And why is that? That's because the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, signed into law by President Donald Trump a number of years ago, is already beginning to phase out some of its business provisions right now. And if acute viewers of yours remember, all of the individual side protections from that Tax Cuts and Jobs Act go away and are repealed if nothing is done in Washington by the end of 2025. So in a couple of short years, I know it seems like a long ways off right now, we're going to be facing one of the largest tax increases in American history if nothing is done in Washington. That is a major threat that's looming, I think, over this discussion. Another one is, of course, our $32 trillion plus now of national debt, and what that means for future tax increases, what it means for borrowing costs for America, what it means to many aspects across the economy. And so those are a couple of things. In addition, commercial real estate, I don't think is out of the woods yet. As we've seen,
we are in a recession
coming up here in the next number of months over the course of the next couple of years. And so while I certainly hope, I think all of us can agree that we hope that Janet Yellen is correct in this regard, I think there's just too much uncertainty and too much risk when it comes to the policy environment to declare that we're going to be in for a soft landing or avoid a recession.
Jewish and non-Jewish citizens of Israel are treated equally. They have equal access to the courts, equal access to public education, equal access to healthcare, and anti-Zionism is the anti-Semitism of the 21st century.
Congresswoman Jayapal later retracted her comments, calling them an attempt to diffuse a tense situation and clarifying that, quote, "I do not believe the idea of Israel as a nation is racist, but that Prime Minister Netanyahu's policies are." Do you think that that distinction at all mitigates the impacts of her comments?
No, that distinction actually compounds her comments, because if you look at what Prime Minister Netanyahu has done, she's referring to the so-called settlers, our Jewish families and Jewish businesses that are merely trying to thrive in the heart of the homeland of the Jewish people in Judea and Samaria. Jewish people have lived there for thousands of years. It's well documented.
Speaker Kevin McCarthy, when asked if the GOP would take action against the Congresswoman because of her comments, had this to say.
The only time action has ever been taken is when we had to take the action.
The most recent action that McCarthy is referring to there is when the House voted to remove Congresswoman Ilhan Omar from the Foreign Affairs Committee for previous anti-Semitic comments that she made. And Omar, as well as others, are expected to protest this joint session of Congress by Israel's president this week. Meanwhile, other Democrats are really eager to solidify their support for Israel. Reportedly, a group of Jewish Democrats are writing a draft statement directly criticizing Jayapal's comments here. That draft was obtained by Jewish Insider, and they're expected to say something along the lines of, "We will never allow anti-Zionist voices that embolden anti-Semitism to hijack the Democratic Party." Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And in weather, Americans around the nation are once again dealing with smoke from the wildfires burning in Canada. Around 70 million people in the U.S. are under air quality alerts. The air quality health advisories cover more than a dozen states from Montana to Vermont and as far south as Tennessee. Around 70 million people are seeing decreased visibility and poor air quality, including residents of Chicago, Detroit, New York, St. Louis, and